Alright, I'm going to start this video recording now because I'm going to go over yours, kind of show you what you're doing, and then we can, if other people come in, we can build on that, or I can show you some other examples of things that, that are happening here so that people can get an idea of what's right and what's wrong. All right, so rotator cuff is a group of tendons attached to four muscles that move the shoulder in a variety of directions. They are these muscles. But there's one thing that we need to get clear here when you're writing these papers, and that is you've got to understand who your audience is, right? Just because you don't know this doesn't mean that your audience doesn't know this. Right? I mean, you've got to understand that your job here is to write a comparison paper, right? Where you're looking at two treatments, against a standard to figure out what's the best, mode of action for that particular condition. So going through, all of this stuff is irrelevant, right? I mean, telling your audience what it is isn't really relevant. What you should be doing is just, look, we need to establish that there's rotator cuff tears, and we've got two treatment options for those tears, right? And what's that? Yeah, right. I mean, just start off with, in order to treat rotator cuff tears, practitioners should, consider these two treatment options, right? Let's get right to the point. Going through and telling me the obvious is, I know you want us to begin broadly and work down towards something specific, but you're setting yourselves up for, comments from me that are, going to be about relevance, right? How is that relevant? Unless you plan on having a specific conversation about each one of these different muscle groups, right? What are you telling me that for, right? This is something that you've got to get comfortable with, and that is, don't just write stuff for the sake of writing stuff, right? Get to the point, and the point is you've got plenty to write about here with your comparisons. You should have plenty to write about with your comparisons. So your treatment options are electrotherapy and manual therapy with exercise. All right, so electrotherapy transmits all these kind of things. All right, semicolon, right? A semicolon indicates that there's two independent clauses coming, right? So you're joining two independent clauses. This one is an independent clause. Electrotherapy is a treatment. That's an independent clause. Whereas is a signifier of a dependent clause, right? So that's a group of words that has a subject and verb, but it can't stand on its own, right? You never have a comma after the word that indicates a dependent clause. So any words like when, while, if, since, although, because, right? Those are all signifiers of dependent clauses. Come on, we started a little bit early because we've got a paper up here. So yeah. So I'm just reviewing a couple of things. In this case, whereas manual therapy is a treatment which healthcare professionals manipulate the joints of a patient, by putting that comma in there, you're trying to make that a transitional word. It doesn't operate as a transitional word. It's a signifier of a dependent clause, all right? If you take that comma out, you don't change anything because this is still a dependent clause, and this semicolon is incorrect here, right? And the semicolon, because this isn't an independent clause anymore, right? So what you need to do is take out this semicolon and just say, whereas manual therapy, no comma, no semicolon. There's no need for any punctuation there because you're telling me that there's two different types of treatments, right? So that's not, that word whereas is not a transitional word like however, consequently. This is all in chapter 2, right? I give you that list of words in chapter 2 for those transitional elements for independent clauses with the semicolon. Therefore, however, consequently, right? Whereas is not on that list, right? Whereas belongs in the dependent clause list. All right, that's a good example because if you create this in your paper, it's a major grammatical error, right? And that ends up counting against you, big. All right. So, Alex, right? So Alex, we started here at the beginning by talking about what was relevant, right? We don't need to go into a bunch of information that's just general information about your condition because you're writing to a medically educated audience, right? So just get to the point, which is you've got a condition maybe at a certain level. So maybe with rotator cuff tears, hey, how you doing?
All right.
with rotator cuff tears, maybe there's different grades of tears that this would be applicable to, right? Because I'm assuming that a full tear, you're probably not going to do manual therapy for. Sure, you can live without a rotator cuff, right? I mean, but maybe this is just a partial tear or something. If you're going to do anything in this introduction, it would be establish the level of the condition that you're operating in, and then the treatment options that are relevant to that level of the condition. All right. So back to your point. So now you introduce the study. So Page et al. Studied the efficacy. Now this is, I just want everybody to know, I am not holding you to any standard. Keith, I think you did yours in like APA style. You did send, in-text citations with the parentheses, the parenthetic stuff. I don't care for this paper, right? Because I'm not holding you to any standard of the AMA or for this, or any research presentation stuff, right? All I'm trying to get you to do at this point is to write effectively and to think critically. All right, so the whole thing about AMA or anything else like that, you don't need to even be asking me questions about that. Just make an attempt to put the author, right, and the citation in there. If I mark something for you, it's just so that you have future reference that, hey, you got to go look that stuff up. All right, but there's no, I'm not holding you for any standards of citations or anything. Just introduce your source as you've done here. So that's exactly right according to the AMA style, right? So superscript numeral. Right? And for just future references, AMA is chronological in order. In other words, the first source that's introduced gets a 1. The second source that's introduced gets a 2.
Okay.
Right?
Because the way I did it was alphabetized.
Right.
So I'll just switch it.
Right.
So even for the bibliography, even though
I don't care at this point, Alex. Don't change it. It's not worth your time. Right? I am panicking right now about the level of success that I'm seeing because the paper's due tomorrow, right? And what I'm finding right now is that people are having a tough time just getting an operational definition under control, right? And this is the thing that's making me really nervous because without that operational definition, you can't read and evaluate those articles, right? So what I'm finding is that people have written about the articles and they don't know what they're writing about, right? Because they haven't established an operational definition first. Right? Without that clear operational definition, this is what I'm going to spend a lot of time on today. Without that clear operational definition, you don't know what you're writing about, right? And that's what I'm finding is that people just, summarizing the article. Oh, here's what they did, and here's what this other article did, and then oh, I like this one better, so this one wins, right? That's not logical. Right? That's not critical thinking at all. That's insanity, right? I don't know who operates that way, but we need to change things. All right, so let's go back to, so you're going to introduce the study and tell me what the study does. So Page, study the efficacy of manual therapy and exercise prescribed to a patient with rotator cuff disease aiming to relieve pain. Now, let's think about focus of action here. We're going to talk about this with paper number 3 in the verb-based writing strategies. This is going to become really important to you, right? Page studied the efficacy. All researchers study efficacy, right? So to tell me that Page et al. Studied efficacy is like telling me that the sky is blue, right? What you need to do is tell me what they accomplished in their study, right? Which is right here, right? They prescribed to a patient, or they aim to relieve and increase, relieve pain and increase function and range of motion through this group of patients, right? That's what they aim to do. And then individuals average and all this kind of stuff participate in manual therapy after obtaining 320 dangling modifiers. Let me go back to this dangling modifier thing, right? A dangling modifier is it's a participial phrase or it's an adjectival phrase. In other words, it's an introductory element, usually ends in ing in there, and it acts as an adjective describing the subject of the sentence, right? So after obtaining 3,620 individuals, you have to ask yourself, well, who did the obtaining? You said manual therapy and exercise did the obtaining, right? That's not the case. The researchers did the obtaining, right? So, and the point is, this is what is a grammatical error, right? Because you're setting me up to think one thing, this is an adjective describing the subject of the sentence, and you didn't give me the subject that was being described. You gave me something different. That's why it's called a dangling participle, dangling modifier. All right. So I'm assuming you're telling me all this for a reason, right? I mean, that if you're telling me about 11 months, if you're telling me about great number of patients, if you're doing all this for 6 weeks on average, I'm assuming that you're establishing some credibility for the study by having the time or the number, and the time may be a factor in your operational definition to say that, hey, if we're going to treat rotator cuff, we got to get it done in 6 weeks, whatever, right? Maybe is that what they're doing here? I don't know, 6 weeks even long enough? Treatment for, yeah, I don't know, right? This is what you've got to start figuring out. Another article by Page, study the efficacy, there you go, study the efficacy of this, all right? But what you can do is they aim to reduce pain and increase function with the use of electrotherapy modalities, okay? And then individuals age 53, suffering for 8 months, participated, they did this many individuals, and provided for 3 weeks on average, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, she's showing that there's some comparability, right, between the two studies, especially since it was done by the same group of authors, probably, right? But now we need to get to the more important stuff, which is that they accomplish a task, right? So they compared the treatment plan to placebo, inactive ultrasound, to measure the patient's healed to the treatment due to secondary factors, right? And then where do you go with this? They both use a 100-point scale to determine level of function the patient provided with. And I'm saying to myself, you haven't established an operational definition yet, right? What seems to be her operational definition? It seems to be pain, range of motion, and there was another thing in there, maybe. I don't know. I'm assuming that function is going to be range of motion, right? So what she needs to do, right, she gets to the point here, electrotherapy is more appropriate treatment due to the high percentage of healing compared to placebo, manageable time frame, and less associated risk. So that seems to be her operational definition, but she hasn't established the standards by which she's going to judge that. In other words, if I'm going to say she's got a higher percentage of healing, right? Well, how are you defining healing? So there's got to be pain factors, right? I think that's one thing you mentioned back there, right? Did you mention pain in the introductory part here? Did they study pain? I mean, I'll go back to it and check. Yeah, reducing pain, increasing function, right? So that's a good one. Aiming to relieve pain and increase function and range of motion. So they're both doing the same kind of things. So if you're going to have this conversation here about pain and function, right, you've got to establish for me at some point, how are you going to evaluate if treatment for pain was successful? So where do they need to be on the pain scales? And they can use whatever pain scales you want. You don't want to use a pain scale in your operational definition. That would be unreasonable, right? Because no two studies are going to use the same pain scales. Well, they might, but who cares if they do? We don't want to be able to apply this operational definition universally. So if pain is a factor, right, I'm thinking if you're treating this patient for 6 weeks or 3 weeks, you're probably not resolving their pain to nothing. So what should pain be reduced to? I don't know, mild? Should you take, I mean, if it's a tear, they're probably in pretty severe pain. So maybe you're moving them from severe pain to moderate pain. Maybe you're going to reduce their pain by 50% or something. And somebody, would you contact me about percentages?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you wrote in there like a 10% reduction in pain for your operational definition?
20%.
Yeah, 20%, right. And so here's the question. So what if I only reduce my pain by 19%? Am I a failure?
Yeah.
So why is 20% the number? Just because you say it is, or is there a cutoff there? Like for something like blood pressure, we know that certain blood pressure readings are riskier than others, right? You would qualify as a stroke candidate if your blood pressure reaches this number, right? But for pain, isn't pain variable?
It is, but when I was doing a lot of the background research, I found that with just physical therapy alone, and in my case particularly, that they weren't achieving greater than 20%.
Okay, but don't let one treatment, like, are you biased then? Are you taking that route because physical therapy wasn't successful? I mean, here's my point. Don't let the studies dictate to you what the operational definition should be, right? You need to figure that out for yourself. So a 20% reduction in pain, if you're just getting that because you like physical therapy and that's what physical therapy can do, right, that's cheating. That's not establishing an operational definition. You need to establish an operational definition based on what you perceive to be an acceptable outcome for this particular condition, right? So if it's a 20% reduction, you're going to have to justify that in some way. Or what I would do to save yourself the aggravation of me writing all these comments to you, right, would be to say, hey, you know what? Let's reduce the pain by a major factor. Like, let's move it from severe to moderate or moderate to mild. And then when you get into your body paragraphs, you can say, look, the physical therapy reduced it by 20%. And if most of the patients started in the moderate range and they reduce it by 20%, that's going to move them to the mild range. Therefore, they're going to meet my standard. You see what I'm saying? All right. I just want people to understand that, throwing hard numbers in your operational definition puts an unreasonable burden, I think, on you to justify why that is. Because I'm going to be asking you the question, why is it not 19%? Why is it not 21%? Right? And you just have no answer for that. So again, pain, you're going to have to quantify that somehow. You're going to have to put in there a standard so that when you look at pain, you're going to be able to say, my patients reached that goal. Same thing with function, right? Yeah, they can use all these 100-point scales that they want. I don't care. What you can write about that in the body paragraphs. In your operational definition, you have to establish function somehow being related to normal, right? I would think that the goal of all of your treatments would be to reestablish normalcy for function. But if normalcy is not applicable here because you're only doing 3 to 6 weeks of treatment, then what would be an acceptable range for function? Would it be to improve it 20%? I mean, we're going to go to that number? Are we going to go do something like that? How are we going to come up with a standard for that?
So wouldn't you be able to scrutinize our standards?
I'm not going to scrutinize the standards as long as they seem reasonable and appropriate, right? I mean, I don't care how you go about doing it. I just think that what you can't do is just let a study dictate to you what the number is, right? I think what you should be doing is just critically thinking about this. If rotator cuff tear, let's think about this. Help her out. If she has patients with rotator cuff tears and she's only treating them in the short term, what do you think she's expecting to achieve in the outcomes? A limited amount of pain reduction and a limited improvement to functionality, right? And let's not hurt them some way, right? Let's get them on the path to healing, right, on their own. Because 3 to 6 weeks, that's not going to resolve anything with a rotator cuff tear. I mean, there's muscle fiber tears in there, right? It's going to take a lot longer than 3 to 6 weeks. So that puts perspective on this, I would think, to say, hey, we're just going to improve function, let's say minimally from maybe a level of disablement, or maybe it can be achieved with range of motion, or whatever you want to put in there. That you might even want to just say that we're going to just show gradual improvement over time. Maybe you can just say that because your standard is going to be really low on this, right? I mean, it's minimal. You're not going to accomplish much in this task. I mean, tell me I'm right or wrong. Do something, right? I mean, what do you think about that?
I feel like that leaves a lot of room to interpretation.
But yes, all right. So, but if you take a look at what she's doing, Eric, with the short-term studies, right? She would justify that by saying, because the treatments are only conducted for a short amount of time, and this is a condition that warrants, long-term treatment, that she can't justify anything greater than that, right? Explain it. That's all I'm asking you to do. If you're going to say to me, you're right, you're dead accurate, right? I mean, it's open to interpretation. But being open to interpretation, like, I go nuts when I read those words like increase and decrease, because I'm going to say, by how much? By what? Right? But if she can say in here, we're only expecting a minimal increase, right? Let's just say, gradual or something like that. I'm going to have to just, and she can say reasons why she's only going to expect that, but I'm going to say, all right, I can say nothing about that. Right? So then she gets to her thesis here, and there's that whole thing about less associated risk, and I get that, risk is not going to be identifiable in any way, right? We can't establish a number for risk, right? All we can just talk about is low frequency and low severity. And in these two, of course, that's all we've got. You know, you're not going to hurt somebody with these types of treatments. So that once you get into the body paragraphs, you begin talking about these 100-point scales. So let's just take a quick look at her paragraph here about this, about the, what are we doing? Electric therapy, patients who underwent, okay, improved function. So she's going to start dealing with function here in her first paragraph. All right, starting in a range of 5 to 22 points of function on a 100-point scale, patients with electric therapy presented an increase of 17 points. And I'm going to say to myself, that's minimal, right? They're way down there on the disability scale, and they're climbing up slowly, right? But my question now becomes, she showed me a minimal improvement here. My question now is, how do I know that the treatment caused that change to occur? What would she have to do? Yeah, she would have to show the comparison to the placebo, and that comparison would be validated through the statistics. So I'm looking here to show this increase in function was due to treatment. The placebo group was given an inactive ultrasound, right? And so they had a 14-point decrease in function compared to the patients with, so that, wait a minute, do they have an increase in function? Yeah, they had an increase and they had a decrease. All right, so these guys went down by 14 points. These guys went up by 17 points. So that makes sense, right? But again, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, where's the stats? Did they offer stats in your article to verify that? That's all they gave you? And then you got to just say, look, how do you know what your patient, I mean, they have thousands of patients in this, right? It's easy to put the stats on that, right? Why wouldn't they report the stats, right? They should be able to just put in there, you know, parenthetically, age below 0.05, or the confidence interval is at 95% or whatever, right? You have to do something to validate this, because what if the patients in the placebo group had a worse condition than those patients who were in the treatment group? Right? They're showing a decrease in function right here. I'm thinking to myself, a decrease in function, what are they doing? Right? I mean, there could be something going on here with these patients that is an uncontrolled variable. That's why the stats would have to be important here to validate this out. But without it, you've got to make mention of the fact that, all right, they didn't provide the stats. Therefore, you know, we can reason that the treatment was causing this, but we have no validation of it, right? That's got to be in there, because this is, look, I need you to think on those two levels all the time. What's clinically significant? What's statistically significant? Because the clinical numbers don't mean a thing if the stats don't verify, right? Because if all you're going to operate is by clinical numbers, then I'm going to say my magic dust shop, I'm opening tomorrow. Right? Because I can't validate that my magic dust is doing anything. So to move on this, she goes and talks about the other one. They started at this and they went up this 22 points. And these guys went up by 15 points. And so I'm looking at all this and I'm going, okay. Compared to treatment, yeah, I mean, somebody's moving up, so let's take a look at this. So if these guys went up 17 points, and these guys increased by 15 points in these two studies, what does that tell you? They both improved, right? And if your standard is low, right, then I would say these are equal. What's the difference between 15 and 17 on a scale of 100? Nothing, right? So they both improved minimally. They both showed improvements. So I would say they both are effective in this case. They're both showing that they're accomplishing the task. Is that not what's happening here?
Yes, for them. But for this paragraph, I was talking more about comparing the treatment to the placebo, of how the difference of them, of how there was a bigger difference between the treatment and placebo.
So what? The difference is minimal, though. The difference is 2 points.
On the scale, yeah. There's no.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, see the irrationalness of her thinking right here? She's trying to make a claim that one's better than the other, based on 2 points. Because what she's doing, this is the problem. She's comparing a treatment article to another treatment article, and that's her argument. When that's not your argument. Your argument is that you need to show this article to your standard, this article to your standard. Right? And you have no standard. You didn't establish a standard, that's why you're comparing them against each other. And I'm going, that doesn't make any sense. Because if all we're doing is comparing, what if they both are terrible? What if they both have minimal amounts of success? Are you just gonna say, oh yeah, well, let's keep using this one because it's, you know, it's at least better than this bad one over here, right? But if it's still not good, why would we even care to use either one of them? That's why the standard is so important. The operational definition is the factor that's going to drive this whole conversation, because a 15-point difference or a 15-point change and a 17-point change don't mean anything different on a 100-point scale. That's the operational definition function. So you would have to conclude here that these are equal, that they're both successful in improving pain or function. You understand what we're doing? Because I'm banging my head against the desk as I'm reading lots of these drafts, right? Alex, you want to put yours up?
Absolutely.
Yours is on computer. I can't put yours up, but we can certainly talk about it if you want. All right. Acute back pain. All right. I love these back pain ones, man. I mean, this is just, it's so hard because back pain is such a difficult thing to define, right? I mean, a lot of times patients with back pain, and all the docs are going to do is just say, you know, treat, right? We don't even know what the causes of it are. But the causes are so varied, it's up to you guys. You got to figure out what's working and what's not working. So, all right. Back pain, it only goes on for 6 weeks. So,
well, acute, 6 weeks.
right, 6 weeks or less, right? So that's good. So you've got a time frame that you're operating under, right? Because if you can't resolve this in less than 6 weeks, it sounds like if you do nothing, it resolves on its own in 6 weeks, right? Maybe? I don't know.
Chronic.
Yeah, all right, yeah, when it becomes chronic, yeah, all right. So heat wrap therapy, pulse and electromagnetic therapy are often used as adjuncts to physical therapy. So in this case, you're doing PT as the common factor, and you're adding these two things to it to see if there's a difference. That makes sense, all right? And you've got this explanation that that it's been demonstrated to work by reducing pain, increasing the temperature of the muscle, and promoting blood flow. It sounds like you're trying to get to an operational definition here, whether you increase or reducing pain. I mean, theoretically, you're telling me what this is, right? And it's changing the metabolic pathways. All right, so let's get to the point.
Yeah, don't worry, I got that covered.
Okay, so these guys studied the efficacy of Thermacare heat wraps. They were instructed to apply the heat 6 hours, and they studied the efficacy of pulse electromagnetic therapy in acute lower back pain. These guys created a double-blind study where 40 patients were assigned. All right, this is good. Each patient was given something, wear the device for a week. Let's see what else we have here. Both studies had physical therapists work with each patient twice a week. Each study recognized people who suffer from people who take non-steroidal damage. All right, so take a look at the variables in here, right? So you've got physical therapy going on. You've got patients taking NSAIDs, right? So now, more than ever, the stats are going to become vital to your conversation, because the stats are going to be able to clarify whether it was the heat wrap or the electrical stimulation that caused the outcome, right? And if the stats aren't there, you got nothing. Okay, so let's get to the point. So instructed to use, all right, so datum means it's one singular piece of data, so data is plural, right? So they will be considered clinically significant if pain is 20% less than we talked about that. Range of motion is greater than 10 degrees from baseline, or compliance is greater than 75%, right? Well, those numbers are very difficult to, to establish. So let's figure out a way to consider this. If we're going to have patients with acute back pain, right, a 20% reduction in pain, let's think about that. A 20% reduction in pain, they're doing PT, they're taking NSAIDs.
They're not doing NSAIDs.
Oh, they're not?
Yeah, it said each study recognized.
Well, they were told not to do that?
Not to
Okay.
take out a variable.
Okay. So, but they're doing physical therapy. Is 20% a reasonable number? I mean, let's think about this. If you're in acute pain, then your number is going to be fairly high on the scale, right? I would say moderate to severe. Wouldn't acute back pain do that? Or can it be low?
Depending on patient, but it can be moderate.
Okay, I'm just asking because I'm trying to figure out, right, that a 20% decline might be reasonable if the patient's numbers are all over the place. If somebody's coming in with a mild form and somebody's coming in with a severe form, right, but it's still just a matter of time that you're thinking about for your condition, then you're not going to be able to say, we're going to move to the mild form, right? You're going to have to say that we're just going to have to move them in one direction, which is toward 0.
And the reason
So maybe the 20% does work here.
it does work in actually technically both cases for a little bit, but it's the statistical, what changes it.
Okay.
And the reason why I just 20%, 10 degrees, 75% is, like you said, that I need to show a lot of stats to prove it.
Right.
So I figured that'd be a better way than saying.
Sure. Yeah, I get it. Right. I don't know about the compliance, how they're measuring compliance. Does this mean 75% of the patients were compliant, or does it mean?
I mean, it gets defined later. We're saying that with the therapy.
I don't think, let me say this. Why don't we just choose the treatment that patients can be more compliant in for your operational definition? Because saying that 75%, that seems like an unreasonable number, right? I would just say, why don't we just talk about compliance being a factor here, that it's easier to do one than another, right? The heat wrap, obviously, you can probably do at home. The electrical stem one, you probably have to be in the clinic, right?
Well, the PEM, you actually, the way the study worked, you wore it, because the entire group had to wear it for a week. One was a placebo, the other one was active.
Right.
You can't tell if it's on because it's not Easton where you get shot.
Right.
So you can't differentiate whether or not it's actually working. So then I found that compliance with that study wasn't meeting my standards because the study was invalid at showing the results because it wasn't really being tested. So
all right, I would just say compliance is a factor here, and I would just say that, you know, the treatment that allows for greater rates of compliance would be more effective. All right, so let's find out what he does. So he talks about the results from all these different indices and the visual analog scale, and they are doing all these things. Oh, by the way, you don't have to tell me that something is clinically or statistically significant if it's less than 0.05, right? We all know that, right? So that's the way the science world works. All right, so heat wraps as an adjunct in these kind of things. Reduction of pain allows people to feel better. I don't know what that word means, so if they feel better, right? I can make people feel better in a lot more ways than put heat wraps on, right? All right, and perform activities of daily living. Look, comma coordinating conjunction. I've written this about 100 times over the last couple of days, right? I'm going to explain this rule to you right now one more time. I need you to get it, right? If you have a comma coordinated conjunction, there's only 2 ways in the English language that this operates. One is if it's in items in a series. In other words, I went to the store and bought milk, bread, and eggs, right? So milk, comma, bread, comma, and eggs. The other one is if you have 2 independent clauses. In other words, you've got a complete sentence on one side of the coordinating conjunction, and you've got a complete sentence on the other side of the coordinating conjunction. In this case, he's got a complete sentence in front of the coordinating conjunction, or coordinating conjunctions, with a reduction in pain allows people to feel better. That's a sentence. This is not a sentence. Perform activities of daily living, right? That's not a sentence. So you can't have that comma with the coordinating conjunction there. If he puts it there, it's called a comma splice, right? And that gets chalked up as a major grammatical error. Right? You need to be aware of these grammar issues, guys. Right? Because when you write for your professors in the later stages of this of your curriculum, right, they're going to expect that you know this stuff, right? They're not going to tolerate it. They're going to hand your papers back to you and say, you didn't learn anything in 315. Right? So they're not going to tolerate it. All right, so let's get back to this. They studied the effect of thermic air heat wraps and then found based on the usability index number of 100. There was, right, where's there? That's the Dixon problem. Let's get rid of that. A decrease in the mean pain level of 50% to 27%. But look at those standard deviations, right? Now, standard deviations are huge, but he rescues it right here with the p-value being below 0.001 or 0.01, right, below 0.05. So it means that even though the standard deviations are high here and they're probably going to cross each other, they're saying that everybody in the group moved at the same rate, even though they started at different points on the scale, right? So that rescues that. Good. And that's all you have to do with p-values is report it parenthetically. Now, if p is above 0.05, well, now there's a reason for you to have a conversation to say, well, why did that occur? Right? So if you've got numbers that show the results, then you would probably say that if it's above 0.05 here, you can say, well, because the standard deviations were so large and the data across, maybe some patients didn't achieve any of the intended goals. So the results of the visual analog scale show this, right? And again, he gets the p-value in there. But these guys gather data about the effects of P, E, and E as an adjunct, right? So now he's comparing. So let's find out what he finds here. And they went from 35 to somewhere around 17 with a p-value below 0.05. And they went from mean pain from 5 down to a 2. So what does all that mean? Does it mean that this was ineffective? I mean, both the p-values show, statistical significance, right? So they're saying that they moved. So now you've got to be able to interpret this change, right, from a 50 to a 27, or a 71 to a 27. Compare that to a 35 to a 17 to a 5 to a 2. It seems to me they're both moving in the right direction. They're both getting results here. So now it becomes, we got to go back to the operational definition. Is that the 20% number?
Yes.
Right. And so are they both moving 20%? Is one moving 21% and one moving 19%? Because if that's the case, I'm going to scream, right? Because I'm going to say, that's not any different. But they both seem to move, and they both seem to be validated that it's the treatment that's causing the movement. So what did he conclude? Heat wraps are more efficacious because they were shown to produce a clinically significant and statistically measurable reduction in pain. But so was the other one.
Except for the ODI index for the second one was insignificant.
But the p-value shows
Clinically insignificant.
what?
Oh,
Clinically means it didn't increase to 20%? Oh, because there's only 17%. I don't like that at all. Right? Come on, right? Let's think about this, right? He's splitting hairs here. He's got 20% reduction. What was the other one? What was the percent reduction?
it was a very good one.
Greater than 20. And then he's got one that's 17. That's close. Right? I mean, so it's going to take you right back to the operational definition and say, why is 20% your number?
Okay, so
You see where I'm coming from? I mean, it seems to me arbitrary that you set 20% as the number, and now you're going to disqualify a treatment because it was close to 20%. If the other one was much greater than 20%, then I would say, all right, now you've got something to think about here. But if it was close to 20, so let's say you got a 22 and the other one's a 17, I'm going to say, is a 5% difference on a 100-point scale that great of a difference that you could throw one in the trash and not the other? I'm just saying.
So then how would I resolve that in a sense of
I got to go back. You got to go back to that operational definition again. And I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking to myself that, maybe you put in there, like about 20%. Right? And because if you do about 20%, now you're opening up, right? It's not a hard line. Now you're giving the flexibility to go to 17% and say, yeah, that's close. Right? And that's why I probably would come back to this, and say, if 20%, about 20% is your number, I would probably consider these to be both clinically efficacious, except that one's got a much stronger outcome than the other. And that's where you're going to put your emphasis. Right? Is that one's outperforming in that range. See, not having the hard number gives you a little bit of flexibility there.
But with the word about, like we talked before, was
Maybe put, all right, how about putting 20% plus or minus 10?
Okay.
Something like that.
Okay.
You could do that.
It.
Yeah, like a range. Because a range seems much more tolerable because of the variability of medicine, right? I mean, medicine is not an exact science, and you can't just throw hard numbers out there because there's no way everybody's going to achieve those numbers. I mean, even with something like blood pressure, right? I mean, we know that blood pressure about 140, right? That's the danger zone, right? But there's that category between 135 and 145. But if you're in that, everybody's going to say, well, you're high, but you're not, you might not be at risk, right? Because no one's established that 140 is a hard number. It's a range. Just saying, this is how we need to think. We need to think in those generalities in medicine because people are all different. There's going to be variability. That's all I'm saying. And especially in something like musculoskeletal, man. I mean, that's just, that's the king of variability. All right. Too good. I mean, if you see what he's doing, he's breaking it down, giving the numbers, giving the stats, validating things, showing how things are moving. That's great. Yeah. And just know that we're going to do this for paper 4. We're going to go off the research and add more research on both sides of this argument and really develop this thing out to be a much bigger monster. Keith, I'm going to bring yours up. Keith, right?
Yes.
I'm going to bring yours up off of my email. You mind? If I do that? What's that?
Needs some work to.
Yeah, it needs work, but well, let's show why. Blow that up. Okay, so he's doing tennis elbow, A-stem versus laser therapy. All right, so he starts off telling me about 1 to 3% of the population worldwide. I could care less how many people have it. Right? But different treatment, conservative treatment options exist. 2 of the treatments are this and this, which is great. So now take a look what he does here. This is in a study conducted by Sepier et al. The combination of base-stem with eccentric exercise was performed to reduce the fibrosis within this junction, thus improving strength and decreasing pain. And so I'm thinking to myself, all right, it seems to me that strength and pain are factors, but I still don't know what they are yet, right? I don't know what the operational definition is. And then he says the effects of this treatment are designed for both immediate relief as prolonged. And I'm going, oh, wait a minute. All right, so is time a factor here? In other words, I'd say you seem to be highlighting the strength of one study here instead of establishing an operational definition. So what I would say is that, sure, you can tell me these guys did this study in this way, but what you should be doing at this point is establishing, hey, these guys did a study on this, these guys did a study on that, and here's the standard we're going to hold them to, which seems to be strength improvements, pain improvements, and if time is a factor, and you got to make sure, you seem to be saying this, that it's designed for immediate and prolonged relief. And I'm going, well, the other one better be designed for immediate and prolonged relief, or this is an unfair comparison. Right? I mean, because you can't say, oh, I'm going to compare this one, which is only an immediate relief, and that has no long-term benefit, but I'm going to say this one over here has got long-term benefit, so this one wins? Well, that's unfair, because the one that provides immediate relief doesn't intend to be long-term. Right? Like the corticosteroid injections, right? If you're looking at corticosteroid injections, they have a lifespan of 3 to 4 months, maybe 6 months if you're lucky. Right? So to hold them to a standard of performance outside of that time frame would be unreasonable. They don't intend to operate beyond that. So my question to you, right, is where is this operational definition? And essentially,
It should just be pain on the data scale.
not a VAS scale. Don't put a scale in your operational definition. Just because they go use a VAS scale doesn't mean there's all sorts of different pain scales, right? So you need to say pain for what? If you're a tennis elbow, right, you're usually, moderate, maybe, I don't know, take a look at what kind of pain they report on the scale, and just say, all right, if they're in moderate range, let's move to the mild. Or what is the expectation? You tell me. Is the expectation to get to 0? If you have tennis elbow, it's a chronic condition. Is it possible to get to 0? It's possible. All right, so why don't you set 0 as your standard one? Just say no pain. If they don't get to if they don't get there, then what do? You say it's not a factor. Yeah, I'm just saying that's what you got. That's the thought process you got to put yourself through. All right, one other thing here is a grammar issue. Anytime you see bright red highlight, that's grammar, right? That means sirens are going off in my head. This right here is a colon. A colon is a terminal mark of punctuation. It ends a sentence, just like a semicolon ends a sentence, right? But a colon allows you to make a list after it. Whatever comes after the colon doesn't matter. It's what comes before the colon that matters. And what comes before the colon needs to be a complete sentence. So possible side effects of this treatment include is not a complete sentence. That's a sentence fragment. Right? So he would have to say include the following, and then he could put the colon there. Or just take the colon out. Right? Just because you have a list doesn't mean you put a colon in your paper. Right? You got to understand that a colon is used to end a sentence. Any questions about these grammar things? Right? I need you to be on top of this stuff, right? It's not only what you say, it's how you present it, right? It's form and function here. Both have got it, both count. And we're expecting you to operate like professionals, right? So you get to know this stuff. And hey, yeah, I get it. You may have spent years never reinforcing this stuff, and your professors in other classes may have let you get away with that kind of black stuff. Well, it doesn't happen here, so you just have to change your strategy. Okay, so when he gets down here, it says, in a controlled trial performed by these guys, grip strength, pain levels failed to differ statistically. And my point here is that you seem to be biased in your approach. In other words, you seem to be establishing that the argument is already over in your introduction. And what I'm saying is that we need to establish the operational definition and say that these are both legitimate treatments that are being considered for this, and that one is outperforming the other based on the standards that you're going to set your operational definition. So let's go take a look at you just sent me the introduction, though, right? Yeah, all right. Great. No problems there. I'm going to open up. Can you guys, I know you probably got questions about other things too here, but I want you to see Stephen's. I asked Stephen for permission to use this, so you can get back to me. Somebody use it anyways. Thanks, Stephen, for helping me out. If you take a look at this, Stephen sent me this kind of panicked email saying, both of my studies have different scales that they're using to measure these outcomes. He goes, so I just tried to figure out a way to, kind of ballpark my scale or my operational definition so that I could use the scale to figure out the answer. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what you should be doing, right? So take a look what he does. Here's the common coordinating conjunction thing that they're, going nuts about. Here's a dangling modifier. So let's talk about what he does. He's doing adhesive capsulitis. Weren't you just doing? Who's doing adhesive capsulitis? Somebody else was in here. All right, frozen shoulder stuff. Oh, it was Monday when we were here. All right. Adhesions, there are options, right? Manual, all these different kind of things, right? So so treatment needs to focus on improving range of motion and pain levels in an appropriate period. All right, so now I'm looking at this and I'm saying, that's good, but it's not clear yet as to what we're trying to accomplish, right? All I'm seeing is the word improving, and I don't see anything here about what is actually done. So he tells me what these guys did in their studies, and then he goes on here, significant progress should be observed after 3 months of either treatment. So now he set a standard for 3 months, and he says, endpoint for range of motion was set at 80% of normal movement by Coretti et al. And I'm going, don't let them tell you what the standard is. Just because that's what they want doesn't mean that that's what should be, unless there is some kind of agreement in the profession that this is what the standard is, right? So 80% might be right, but then again, I would have to ask for what that means. All right, so then he goes, so if he's going to use 80%, he's got to come up with a justification for it other than you don't let somebody else do it for you. And then he says pain level was measured on different scales in each study, but should be reduced from baseline measurement to at least 50% to be considered successful. And so I'm thinking to myself, a big number like 50%, that's a little bit easier to swallow than 20%, right? Or because what he's saying is, if we just want to cut pain in half. So if I were to say anything to Stephen here, I would probably say, and he does at least 50%, he kind of ranges it, right? We're just looking for a ballpark. Let's just cut pain in half, in or about half for these patients, which I'm okay with that. And then he says, so this thesis here, corticosteroid injections are superior. When compared to physical therapy, they offer greater improvement in pain reduction and range of motion over a shorter period of time. Now, let's think about this. I just want to see where the trap is here. He's made a point of saying they had greater improvement in pain and range of motion, and then he says over a shorter period of time. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. If he's got standards, and they both meet the standards, but one operates at a higher rate inside the standard. So let's say one gets the job done in 3 months because that's what he said the time frame was, but the other one gets it done in 2 months. Does the one that gets it done in 2 months win? Is that one better?
If you're having time be part of the operational definition.
Time is part of the operational definition, and the operational definition is 3 months. So if one gets it done in 3 months, the other one gets it done in 2 months, is the 2 months better? No, because the operational definition was 3 months, right? The standard was 3. You can't change the operational definition in the middle of the paper, right? Unless you want to say, hey, 3 months is our ballpark, but if you get it done better or faster than that, that's better, right? So put that in your operational definition. You see my point? And the same thing here with, hey, they had a greater improvement in pain reduction in range of motion. So same thing. If you set pain at a particular level, we're going to cut pain in half. And somebody gets pain at 50%, and somebody gets pain at 70%. Does the 70% win? You would think yes, but if all we're trying to do is accomplish 50% reduction, then both of them win. Both of them do it. I'm just saying that when you set that standard, that is your standard, or you need to make it more variable in your language, because you can't change the standard in the middle of your paragraph or in the middle of your argument, right? That doesn't seem reasonable.
So you would just, with the 2 and 3 months, you would just say that one is better.
Well, right. I would say both meet the standard of getting it done in 3 months, except this one's getting it done faster, right? So you're not saying that it's not ineffective, or you're saying that both of them are doing the job. And we set 3 months, and if both of them get it done in 3 months, then that's great. They both are effective. But one's getting it done faster, so that may mean something for you, but it doesn't mean that that's, in terms of the argument, I would say, hey, they both meet the standard. So they're both equal in that case. You guys have any other questions about this stuff? I'm considering moving the paper back to Thursday because I'm not finding that there's a lot of people who've got a complete control over this. If you can turn it into me on Wednesday, I'll, put a little star next to your name in the book or something. It doesn't do anything for you. It just means that you're on track. But if you have to have an extra day, if you need more time, then let me know, right? And if you're off track right now and you don't know what you're doing, you're circling the drain, right? Don't panic. We can be flexible with that time. Just put some more pressure on you to write paper 3. Paper 3 is an easier paper to write. And that's due on Monday. Okay? Any other questions? Want to look over your shoulder before you leave here? Okay. All right, let's see. I just need you to leave here today feeling confident that you can do the kind of thinking that we need you to do at this level, so that, and it all comes with just being organized, rational, and logical, right? It's just, I was reading papers this morning where people were just blatantly biased in their paper. Just, physical therapy does all of these wonderful things, and all these other treatments are just, hocus pocus, and they're gone. And why would we even consider them? Obviously, they have to have some legitimacy in order to be considered part of the conversation. So the 4 things you guys need to be thinking about as you're writing this, right, is, do you have a unified essay? In other words, do you have the critical thinking components accomplished in your task? Is it coherent, right? In other words, are you doing a good job of comparing the treatments? Can you look at the evidence, evaluate it, right, and then compares against your standard? That's That needs to be done. Can you write in complete sentences, right? Which I thought every 7th grader in America could do, right? But we seem to be having some problems with some of those rules, which I get it. We can figure that out, right? That's not hard to learn, right? Just make sure you leave yourself time to go back and evaluate that stuff, right? And elevating that diction. I'm already seeing a huge reduction in the conversational style, right? Which I'm expecting that to be an ongoing process. But there are those obvious ones, right? The there is and there are's and there was is, it is and it seems, right? Those things need to go. Right? That's not hard to go find that stuff and eliminate. You do those 4 things, you'll have success, right? Which means you can get a C. Do them all well, and you get an A, right? Am I expecting to get an A in this paper? No. So the reason why the paper is worth barely anything in terms of the grade. But it'll be the first assignment that I gave you a grade for, right? And you got to know, right? I mean, that you're on a learning curve here. And you're going to start low and you're going to progress. Don't expect it from here, just flows away from assignment to assignment, right? I need you to develop as writers, and there's no way you can develop in a week's worth of time. This class has been running. So expect to have some frustration and some difficulty here at the beginning, but once you get to that paper 4 and research papers, you should be pretty much on track and get things done. All right. At this point, then, I'll look at yours. Anybody else got any individual questions? You can hang around and ask those individual questions, but I'll kill the video